Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulullah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. So we'll begin as we usually do with the dua for everyone in attendance, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants you all Jannatul Firdaus, elevates and raises your rank, allows you to learn useful knowledge and implement it in your life to the point that when it is your time to go, your soul comes out gently. You have a light squeezing in the qabr. You are spared the adab al-qabr, which is the punishment of the grave. The fitnat al-qabr is easy for you. And on the day of judgment, the day when there will be no shade, you'll be granted shade. When there will be no light, you will have light. And that you'll go across the sirat, which is the most scary moment for everyone in existence and everyone that will be in existence, like a flash of light. And that Allah forgives us all of our sins, guides us on the straight path, and helps us to sin no more. Or if we do sin, as we will, that we are able to recognize it and repent. Ameen. So the topic for tonight is children's rights on their parents. So typically, if you've ever attended any classes, lectures, khutbahs, anything at all, everyone usually hears what rights parents have on their children and the behavior that we should have with our parents. And next week, we will cover that for a refresher for anyone that needs it. And for those of us who maybe have missed a few points, because we can always treat our parents better, we'll go over that too, so that everyone can perfect that part of their worship. But tonight, we're talking about children's rights on their parents. And most of us have probably never heard an entire lecture dedicated to what rights our children have. So since it's a less often covered topic, yet is still of great importance, we'll be dedicating most of tonight to that, if not all of the 30 minutes that we'll be going over different topics with questions tonight. So just as violating the rights of others with your tongue, as we've been talking about the past 2 weeks, is a great sin, so too is violating the rights of anyone. Your children are Muslims. They have rights. If you violate them, that's an injustice. It's the same thing as if you backbite, slander, gossip, or talebear, or if you mock or insult someone. You not only have committed a sin by doing so, you've also committed a sin to the point where you can't just simply ask for forgiveness of Allah. You need to do that because you do need to apologize to Allah for committing the sin, but you also do need to make it right with your children. And making it right is not simply something like, oh, but I gave you everything, so obviously it's okay between us. Look how you turned out, you're fine. You have to make the specific incidents right where you violated their rights. So again, we'll cover next week for children, and of course, all of us are someone's children, what we need to do to make things right with our parents and ensure that we're not violating their rights. So the next question most people would have is, well, then what then are the rights children have over their parents? Well, it starts before they're born. You see, brothers, you're required to choose a righteous wife who will be a good mother to them. And sisters, a righteous husband who will be good to them, as a good mother to them. And parents, so this would be the grandparents of these children, or your own children, you're obligated to aid them in this. So as the hadith that's very well known advises, do not choose your spouse based on looks, status, or wealth. Choose them on their righteousness. And parents, if you're getting your children married, choose your children's spouse based on righteousness, not based off the ties to the community or things you think you'll gain and benefit out of it, or what you think your child will benefit. A righteous spouse will benefit them significantly more, both in this life and the next. And if you're worried about who's going to take care of you when you're older, well, a righteous spouse will ensure that your child takes care of you. So sisters, what specifically in the womb is going on? What do you need to do? What's the child's right on you while they're growing inside of you? Well, first is you need to eat. This isn't the time for dieting, eating junk food, or anything that could harm the baby. You need to provide a safe space for them to grow and everything that they need. Now, this isn't just the sister's responsibility. Brothers, you as fathers are required to provide this nourishment to your wife and provide her protection and the baby protection. Now, once born, there's a few sunnahs. Some of you may have heard of the one of chewing some dates or sweets and placing them in the baby's mouth. That's the sunnah. You don't have to do it, but it is encouraged. but your child is entitled to a good name. So when you pick their name, oftentimes you pick a prophet's name, that's the best way to do this. Give them the name of a prophet. If it's not the name of a prophet, something that carries a good meaning, not just in your society, but in all societies. So if a name has a double meaning, don't pick that, especially if the double meaning could be bad. There's another sunnah where you can shave the baby's head and give the weight of the hair's value in silver to charity. There's a difference of opinion as to whether you would do this for a female child, but as we know in many cultures, the child's head is shaved anyway. So this is something we're already doing for the most part. The akika is another responsibility. This one falls on the fathers. So mothers, you should encourage the father to do the akika if he hasn't already done it. This is, of course, the sacrifice where, one goat is sacrificed for a female child, 2 for a male child. And sometimes this isn't done for whatever reason. And if you have the ability to help someone do it, you should. But overall, it is the father's responsibility, not the grandfather, not the uncle, not the mother, not the brother or the sister. It's the father's responsibility. So fathers, make sure you do this. And if you haven't, make sure you go back and do this for your children if you can afford it. At the same time, children are entitled to receive 2 years worth of breast milk if the mother is able. If not, then the father needs to provide a wet nurse or another suitable substitute. That's right, the father needs to provide the wet nurse or suitable substitute. Because if the mother was able to provide breast milk and there were no medical impediments, so sometimes a mother has to take antibiotics or something after childbirth and they can't give breast milk to the child. So that mother has no shame on them and there is nothing to blame for them. They have not violated the child's rights. They could not give the child this milk. So in this case, now it's the father's responsibility to provide a wet nurse or suitable substitute. And if you divorce and a child is born, then either the child can stay with the mother for 2 years and receive milk, or the father can choose to provide a wet nurse. That's the obligation of the father, is to provide this. Now, in the United States, we have child support. And sometimes you'll hear of women having to pay child support. Brothers, this is a grave sin. Do not ever allow a court to obligate your ex-wife to pay child support, because you as the father are financially responsible for your children, to clothe them, to feed them, to protect them, to educate them, to make them legitimate. So in other cultures, you'll sometimes have children born outside of wedlock or in a marriage, and they're like, oh, who is the father? In Islam, if it's your wife, they're born on your bed, you are the father, the child has that right to legitimacy, and there shall be no question of this. You do not have a right to say, oh, that's not my legitimate kid, not my kid. Look, if it comes out of your wife, you're married, it's your child, and they have a right to that legitimacy. And if it is your child, obviously they have a right to that legitimacy. And you must clothe, feed, house, and protect them with the same standard of living that you live at. So if you're driving a Ferrari and wearing custom designer suits, your children cannot be running around wearing clothes from Goodwill. You have to feed and clothe them to the same standard that you feed and clothe yourself. Now, of course, if you can't afford things and you shop at Goodwill yourself, then you're not obligated to go and buy expensive brand name clothing for your children. You're only obligated to provide for them what you can. Fathers are also obligated to provide for the education of their children. Now, you're going to notice a trend here. I'm saying fathers, 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 fathers. And that's because for the most part, men are responsible in our religion. Women are responsible for essentially the supporting duties of supporting the man's responsibilities, making sure that money is not being wasted, making sure that they're not spending extra, making sure that if the father is out working, then they're ensuring that there's food on the table and the kids are looked after. But at the end of the day, it is the husband's responsibility, the father's responsibility to provide for his family in its entirety, which is why generally you'll see men have a special status when making decisions, because they have to be able to financially provide and make those decisions. But again, that comes with the great responsibility of, if the children don't have clothes, the father is sinful. If they don't have food, the father is sinful. If they don't have a house or protection or education, the father has committed a sin in this case. There is no way around this obligation. When we talk about education, they must be educated in at least the very basic levels of the 5 pillars of Islam, the 6 pillars of Iman, what is halal and haram, and the avoidance of shirk. They must receive education in good character and adab. and also the education that's required for them to earn a halal living. So if they want to become scholars, alhamdulillah, mashallah, support them in that. That'll be a great benefit for you. But if they're not, help them become doctors, lawyers, engineers, police officers, any kind of career that can help them make a successful living in this life without them having to fall into haram jobs. Now, again, fathers are required to spend on all of these matters to educate them, or if they can't educate them themselves, find someone who's capable. So if you know about these matters and you can adequately educate your children, you can do it yourself. There's no harm in that. You can teach your kids as much religion as you know. And if you fall short, then find someone who can fill in those gaps. If you don't know enough religion or don't feel comfortable teaching it, find someone who does and give your children to them to teach that matter. Just as you give your children to schools to teach them secular subjects, the worldly matters. And if you have to spend money to do it, this is, again, it's obligated on you as a father to do so. Now, we've been commanded to treat all children fairly, showing no preference. That means no preference between children and no preference because of their gender. So you can't say, this is my oldest son, I'm just going to give them everything, and my younger son, whatever, you're just like my younger son. You also can't go, oh, I'm going to give my sons everything and my daughters, they're my daughters, they're going to go off to someone else's house. No, all of your children must be treated equally. Now, obviously, there are things that sisters don't do that brothers do, and brothers don't do that sisters do. That's, of course, not treating them unequally. That's treating them according to their own situation. Now, I'll be getting to the questions toward the end, but please put them in the chat as you have questions. Now, when we're talking about treating them equally, again, if you have daughters, all I have to say is alhamdulillah. Of course, you should treat them equally. Some might even say better than your sons, because if you have two daughters and you treat them fairly and you raise them correctly and you treat them well, they will become shields for you against the fire. So brothers, you should be thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if you have daughters. Now, on that, we also have to remember our children do not belong to us. They're a trust given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, oftentimes we'll be like, yeah, I know they're a trust given to me from Allah, okay. But what does that mean? Well, it's the same thing if anyone gives you anything. Your employer tells you you're responsible for this matter, this equipment, this money. If you keep it safe and do the things you were told that your employer told you to do, or your friend or anyone told you to do, then you'll get rewarded and you'll be fine. But if you were to misuse it or abuse it, you're not going to be fine. Obviously, your employer will fire you. You'll get punished. You could go to jail depending on the situation. So think about that. Allah has given you these children to raise them as Muslims, upright Muslims, and in order to ensure their safety. So if you do these things, you'll be rewarded. If you don't do these things, you will be punished. So we often hear this saying that Jannah is at the feet of your mother. And I'm sure everyone's heard this one before. Please, whatever you do, yes, this is true. This is an authentic hadith. Do not misuse and quote this to bully your children or to encourage your children to do things or to scare your children. Because just as Jannah is at the feet of the mother, and yes, if your children didn't fulfill your rights when you were alive, that could be the thing that prevents them from going to Jannah. So too could you be prevented from going to Jannah by not fulfilling the rights of your children. And they have a right to safety, both from us and by us. So they have a right to be protected by us, and they have a right to be safe from us. Just as all Muslims have a right to be safe from your tongue and your hands, your children have the right to be safe from your tongue and your hands too. So now we're going to get into the part that probably is the reason most people attended today. So can I be, I'll phrase this a little bit nicer. It might come up, my child's acting up. Can I hit my child? Can I beat my child? The answer is no. Beating your child is haram. And I'm going to say that 2 more times. Beating your child is haram. Beating your child is haram. You cannot beat your child in Islam. Now, I'm sure someone here is going to go, brother, there's a hadith. It talks about, if your child, teach them to pray by it when they're 7. If they don't by 10, then beat them. Well, this is an example of why the average person should not go read hadith without a scholar or a knowledgeable person to explain them to them. The hadith is not telling you to beat your child. It's more talking about smack or hit. And when we say smack, we mean like a light slap on the hand, the proverbial slap on the wrist, as you hear people talk about. Now, it also can't be on the face, hand or feet. Those are the two places scholars have said. A light smack on the hands or feet, no more than 3 times, and it cannot leave a mark, and it cannot permanently hurt the child. So if your child's hand gets bruised, or if your child's hand gets broken or injured in some way, then you did it wrong. That's not allowed. It's literally just a slight smack on the hand, and that's it. But we have to look at this hadith closer. It says, train your child to pray at 7 and smack them at 10. There's a 3-year period in there. So this implies that before you're even allowed to touch your child, you had to have been trying your best for 3 years to correct the behavior in every other way, through encouragement and reward, through speaking with them and telling them the benefits of it, through taking away things like their phone or any other nice thing you've given them, through grounding them, through making them do extra chores. You've done this for 3 years and nothing else worked. So you're doing the whole snap out of it, smack on the hand, I'm being serious now. So if your kid does something and it hasn't been years of trying and you really haven't been trying your hardest on this, and you cannot honestly say that, you cannot even smack your kid lightly like it says. And to put this into context, the Prophet ﷺ never hit a woman, he never hit a child, and he never hit an animal. He never hit a kid, not once. There's instances and many hadith where one of the younger Sahaba who was a kid was doing something for him and forgot or didn't do it. He was never reported of getting angry with them or hitting them. He might have just reminded them and said, oh, what are you doing? Like, oh, I'm playing. Okay, well, did you do what I asked you? And then he'd give them the stern look, which oftentimes is more effective than hitting in the first place. And they would realize what they've done or haven't done. And then they would go do the thing they should have done. There's also another hadith where the Prophet was kissing his grandson. And one of the other companions said, I have never kissed my child in my life. And he said, those who do not give compassion shall not receive compassion. This is very, very clear and something that you'd want to remember. You need to show compassion in everything. Now, okay, I told you after those 3 years, maybe you can do the smack on the hand. But when we talk about the smack on the hand, you have to wonder to yourself this: why do most people beat their children? Is it because the kid did something wrong and you want to train them? Or is it because you're angry with them and you want to take out your anger? Think about it this way. Next time you're angry at a child, stop for a second and walk away. That's what the Prophet ﷺ would do when he got angry. He'd walk away, cool down, and then come back and talk about it. And think to yourself this: if your brother, Thomas, me, if I was the one that did this, would you hit me? I can guarantee you, inshallah, the answer is no. And you'd think, okay, well, why wouldn't I hit him? 1, because I might go to jail. 2, embarrassment in the community from being shown as an angry, violent person. And 3, because you'd be afraid that I would hit you back, and maybe I hit a lot harder than you do. So why are you hitting the kid then? It's because there's someone you feel can't fight back. They can't do anything back to you. And that's called oppression, which is a form of injustice. And Allah will punish that on the day of judgment. So please, except for the instance we talked about, that light smack on the hand after trying everything, do not beat your children. And just so we're clear, you can go on islamqa.info, a Salafi scholar, he will tell you this. And he said most Salafi scholars who are actually scholars will tell you this. Hanafi scholars will tell you the same. You can go all the way to the most liberal scholars, all the way to the most conservative scholars, Shafis, Hanafis, Hanbalis, Malikis, they'll all tell you the same interpretation of the hadith. And the ones who don't, they're being a little bit off the main path at that point. Because again, if islamqa.info and Bilal Phillips can agree with Faraz Rabbani, if you're familiar with all of these people, they're opposite ends of the spectrums from each other, and they agree on this matter, that this is what it means. So now that we've covered, no, you cannot beat your children, it's only a light smack and only after exercising all other options. And even then, the sunnah truly is not to hit a kid, because the Prophet ﷺ never did it once. We'll move on to, well, if my kid doesn't listen to me? Can I kick them out or disown them? What if they marry someone I didn't want them to marry? What if they do something I don't want them to do? The answer is no. One, you can never disown your kids. They are always your children, and you will always be obligated to them to fulfill their rights, just as your child cannot disown you. Your kid cannot just get up one day and go, you're no longer my mother, you're no longer my father, I disown you. They can't. It's family ties. You can be mad for 3 days, but as the hadith goes, you must reconcile, because this religion is all about keeping family and community ties. So no, you cannot disown your children. You cannot kick them out of the house. So let's talk about kicking out of the house. Why can't you kick your kids out of the house? Let's think about this. If they can't support themselves, they might have to turn to a haram source of living. No longer being able to do that. They may not be able to practice their religion because they might have to take jobs that prevent it. They might have to live on the street in an undignified manner. The harm of you kicking your child out of the house is much greater than whatever it is they weren't listening to you on. So don't do that. And if let's say they say, I'm not a Muslim anymore, I want to be a Christian or an atheist, and you kick them out of the house, you think that's going to make them become a Muslim again? No, they're just going to be even more firm in their other belief. We find children who are being neglected in the community, and their father, their mother, whoever was responsible for them is not providing for them. You know what happens? Christians move in, atheists move in, non-Muslims move in, mentor these children, provide for these children. And what do these children do? They become Christians, they become atheists, they become whatever those people are, because now they're being supported by them. So think about it. You don't fulfill your rights to your child, you could cause them to become a non-believer. If you're the cause of a sin or you aid in a sin, you're going to receive bad deeds for that. And you don't want those bad deeds. You don't want to push someone to disbelief or cause someone to disbelief because you didn't fulfill their rights. And that gets on to the next part of, how long are you obligated to support your children? Well, this is a tricky question for a lot of people. And I would frame it this way. How long are your children obligated to you? The answer is forever. If your children are able to support you and care for you and provide you all of your rights, and you're unable to support yourself, then your children have to support you. And it's the same way around. If your child is unable to support themselves and they're unable to do what they need to do to practice their religion, you are obligated to continue supporting them. You're also obligated that as soon as they're able to be married and they're willing to be married, because of course you do need their consent to marry them. You cannot just marry your child off without their consent. You need to get them married. So if your 18-year-old son comes and says, Mom, Dad, I want to be married, I'm finding it hard to stay single and not sin, get them married. Find them a righteous spouse, marry them off. And that's another right that children have, the right to become married when they're ready, when it's time. And when they're ready does not mean when you've decided that they've graduated medical school and they're a doctor making a large sum of money, or they work in IT making a large sum of money, and they can definitely support the family without, you having to contribute to it. Look, you're obligated to support them and to help them and to ensure they can practice their religion correctly. This whole idea of kicking your children out at 18 or not supporting them when they become married because they're married now, this is an American idea. This is a Western idea. Everyone who's from another country originally, you'll know this. You get married, you move into your in-laws' house. It's the same here. This is how Islam is built. If your child gets married and they can't support themselves and their spouse, they move in with you. Everyone helps out. Yes, your child should definitely needs to get a job to provide for their wife. But in those formative years, they shouldn't be left to fend for themselves. That'll cause strain on their marriage and probably strain on their practice of religion. So please help them. It's an obligation to support and help your children. And trust me, if you meet all of your child's rights and obligations and you are kind to them and you are fair to them, there is no way that child, when you're old and you need help, is going to turn on you and say no. And that's the logic behind this, that we always hear there's many hadith that talk about, and many verses in the Quran, when we talk about inheritance, for instance, says, you don't know who's most valuable to you. Well, if you fulfill the rights of everyone you're supposed to fulfill the rights to, that's what that means. Because your parents will be there for you. They will support you no matter what. Your children will be there. They'll support you no matter what. You'll have a strong family and a strong community. And that's what we're looking for. So when I end this specific topic, I do want to remind everyone, do not quote hadith and Quran to justify something. If you're in an argument with someone and you want to win and it's not a religious argument, don't say things to people like, oh, there's a hadith that says as soon as your brother says, I'm sorry, or as soon as your sister says, I'm sorry, you have to forgive them. One, those are da'if hadith. Those are weak hadith. You can still act on them, but they're weak. But don't do that just to make someone say, okay, I accept your apology. We're all good now sooner. Don't use that going to Jannah is at the feet of your mother in order to make your child do something or to prove your point. Like, wow, look what I can do. I'm your mother. Yes, you're their mother and they need to respect you, because if they don't fulfill your rights, that could prevent them from going into Jannah. But you also have to remember, if you don't fulfill their rights, it can be the same for you.